I'm an avid reader here at No Sleep. My favorite subgenre is the rules. You know the ones. Person moves into a house or starts a job and finds a list of rules on the first day. Person doesn't follow the rules for whatever reason, and stuff starts going sideways. I always thought I was better and smarter than the protagonist. I'm good at following rules, right? I could remember to not leave my room after a certain time, or to keep my eyes down when talking to the person in the brown pants, or whatever. I never really believed the stories here were real, despite the admonishment at the top of the subreddit. So I hope you can imagine my surprise when I walked into my new apartment and found a frame hanging on the wall by the door, which held a yellow piece of parchment with a fancy calligraphy heading which said, "The rules of the house." I have to be honest here and tell you that my first thought was, this isn't a house, idiot. Then I thought, no way, it can't be real, as I walked over to take a closer look. At first, I thought it must have been one of those cheesy posters families put up, with pop culture references or ways to treat each other. But as I walked up to it, I saw my mistake. It was a list of the rules. Here's what it said. Knock twice before walking through the bathroom door. This is doable, I thought. Always wash the dishes immediately after cooking or eating. Ugh. Okay, Mom. If you hear 3 knocks, don't open the door. I hope they knock loud. If you feel like you're being watched, don't look for the watcher. Shy guy. If you wake up in the night and hear breathing, cover your head with your blanket until morning. Seems like the kids were right all along. As you can see by my snarky first thoughts, I didn't think it was real at first. I knew I had read enough though, to take it seriously anyway. So, when I went to the bathroom to put things away, I knocked twice, then did the same on the way out. I washed the dishes when I finished dinner. I figured I would do things just in case. You know. Well, I was glad I had been cautious when I felt the tingle at the back of my neck, and I knew that someone was watching me. I remembered not to look at the watcher, so I kept my eyes glued on Twitter. I knocked again when I went in to brush my teeth, and I realized that this isn't the life I want to live. I know, it had only been one day, and the rules weren't all that bad. This is what I think the stories don't convey. It's a drag. Knocking twice before going into the bathroom. 2 times had been enough for me. What if I'm tired when I get home and don't want to wash the dishes? It's my home. I should be able to do what I want in it. So I stopped unpacking and texted the landlord to see if there was another open apartment in the complex. I got lucky and there was. So I begged the landlord to let me switch. He didn't seem surprised at all at my request, which made me assume that he knew about the rules and made me feel angry that he didn't warn me. But I got over that because I was so happy to switch places. Once the switch was made, I breathed a sigh of relief and got my new place all set up after I made sure there was no framed set of rules hanging up anywhere. I lived happily in my new place for a solid week. No knocking, washing the dishes when I wanted to, and sleeping soundly without being watched. You can imagine my surprise when I came home to find an envelope taped to my door and opened it to find a new set of rules. Leave the kitchen window open 1/4 of an inch all the time. Never look at the ceiling in the bathroom when the sun isn't out. When you hear the sound of bell tolling, spin around until the tolling stops. Never leave dishes in the sink. Always set an extra place at the table. Knock before you go through any door. I sat down hard on the floor, dropped the paper, and closed my eyes tightly, willing the paper to disappear and things to go back to normal. When I opened my eyes to verify that the paper did not, in fact, disappear, I took several deep breaths as I rushed to open the kitchen window and wash the dishes. I gave thanks that it was an efficiency apartment and there was no door between the living room and the kitchen. Then I walked into my bedroom, making sure to knock before entering, and collapsed onto my bed, weeping, because I was going to have to move again. I didn't think the landlord was going to take kindly to me requesting another move, so I sat up and really thought about it. Well, these rules aren't quite as creepy as the other ones, I thought to myself. No watcher or breather. That's good. Maybe I can do this. I can leave the window open and set an extra place and do the dishes. So I decided to stay for a while and look for a new place eventually when I couldn't take it anymore. Like I said, having to follow strange rules in your own home is a drag. After a week, I had mostly gotten used to the rules. They weren't quite second nature, but I followed them because I didn't want to find out what would happen if I didn't. I knocked, I washed. Actually, I mostly got takeout and ate in my car. I didn't look at the ceiling. I spun, and I kept a sweater in the kitchen because the wind gets cold. Under the drudgery of it, I started to feel cocky about it. Started to feel a little bit of superiority. Started to feel like I could comment on people's stories like, I could do it. Don't be a wuss. Then, I found an index card on my desk at work. At noon, hold your breath for 15 seconds. Tap your right knee anytime someone sneezes. End every email with 2 periods. If you see a shadow in the corner of your office, beg its forgiveness for interrupting it. I froze. I didn't know what was happening. I did know what was happening, but I couldn't believe it. Then I heard someone sneeze and tap my right knee. I decided to take a few days off from work to figure this out. I sent an email to my boss asking for a few days of PTO, citing an unexpected illness in the family. I almost forgot to end the email with 2 periods. Thank God I remembered at the last second before I hit send. My boss is great, so she responded almost immediately that I should take as much time as I needed. I packed up my things and forced myself to walk rather than run out to my car. I was feeling frantic now. I never read about anyone having 2 sets of rules at one time, and I certainly didn't trust myself to remember them all the time. I was thinking about how maybe I could just sleep in my car as I walked through the parking garage, and I stopped dead in my tracks when my car came into sight, with a white piece of paper tucked under the wiper blade on the driver's side of my car. For a single moment, I let myself believe that it could be a parking ticket or something. Then I took a deep breath and finished walking to the car. I felt tears spring into my eyes and start trailing down my cheeks as I read the writing on this paper. If you run a yellow light, kiss your index finger and touch it to the ceiling of the car. Never turn the music up past volume level 9. Never turn the same direction 2 times in a row. If the radio tells you to take a turn, obey it. Don't eat or drink in the car. Don't imagine you can escape. It took some doing, but I managed to get home following the rules. The most difficult rule to follow was not imagining escaping. The rules were following me, and it didn't seem like there was any safe place. I thought about going to my parents' house. I thought about selling my car and taking the bus forever. I thought about giving it all up and living in a box under the bridge. I thought about these things and dismissed them all because I couldn't really do any of them. I sat in my car for a few minutes when I reached my apartment complex, taking some deep breaths to steady myself, and worked up my courage to face the rules in my apartment. When I had gathered my courage, I walked up to my place and knocked on the door before going in, and then dropped my things and plopped down on the couch. I rubbed my eyes as I let my hair down and stretched. I was looking for the TV remote when I noticed a framed document hanging on my wall. It was a yellow piece of parchment. The heading at the top was written in calligraphy and said, "The rules of the house." The first item said, "Knock twice before walking through the bathroom door." I buried my head in my hands and wept. There really was no escape. All of that was several hours ago. I'm writing this on my table under my blankets as I listen to heavy breathing from the other side of my bedroom. I can't make it until sunrise, but I'm young, and life looks pretty bleak under the weight of the rules. It's been about a week since my last experience with the rules. I made index cards with the rules on them to carry in my wallet just in case. Even though I've gotten them memorized already, it's easier to remember things when you don't know what happens if you forget. You know. I've even been ending texts with 2 periods just in case. I keep thinking about a couple comments which suggested that I should ignore the rules and that maybe it was mental issue on my part. rather than something supernatural like in the stories. At first, I was offended that people would suggest either of those things. After a while though, I realized that they had a point. I did need to know whether or not this was really real. I looked at the rules and decided that the safest set to test out was probably the set in my home. After a little more thought, I decided to not set that extra place at dinner, so I cooked up some stir fry and then sat down to eat, all by myself, with only my plate on the table. It was a little odd not to see that second setting, and by the time I was halfway done with my meal, the desire to get up and set the second place was almost uncontrollable. I fought through it and gulped down the last few bites as quickly as I could without choking, feeling proud that I won. I tidied up, did the dishes, and finished out my evening. I only had to spin once, which was a relief because the bell tolled 3 times the other night. I was just glad it tolled when I was in my living room and could collapse onto my couch because I was so dizzy that I could barely stand. I grabbed my phone, knocked, and headed into the bathroom to do my toiletry, making sure to keep my eyes on my phone the whole time since it was after dark, and then headed into my bedroom. I looked back into the kitchen as I knocked just to make sure that everything was right and the block was still under the window. Satisfied that I had followed every other rule, I climbed into bed and pulled out Reddit to read for a while until I fell asleep. I heard a noise right before I fell asleep and almost got up to check it until I realized that what I heard was 3 light knocks, so I stayed put. The next morning, I slept late because the breather had woken me up, and it's really hard to fall back to sleep with the blanket over my head and someone breathing in my room. I woke up and stretched before going over to the rules card that I kept in my room now. It was amazing how quickly glancing at them had become a morning routine, like brushing my teeth. I slid out of bed and went to the bathroom, knocking quietly on each door frame of course, and looked up at the ceiling just for fun, because I could. I was feeling happy and cheerful until I walked into the kitchen area and saw that the fruit in my fruit bowl was all rotten. I thought that it could be a coincidence, so I went to my refrigerator. When I opened the door, all my food was rotten. I stopped dead in my tracks and gasped as tears sprang to my eyes. It was real. It was all real. I'm so sorry, I choked out through my tears. I'll obey. I will. I hope that whomever put these rules in place believed in second chances. I stood in place as I took deep breaths and calmed myself down. I took a few minutes to collect myself and then pulled out my phone to take another piece of advice y'all gave me. I texted my landlord to see if he would stop by my place and literally pumped my fist when he texted back that he would be by at 3. I looked at the clock, did some math, and decided to use my day to find out more about my situation. I was scared, but I've seen enough movies to know that there might be a solution. I started by heading down to the cute little coffee shop down the block. It was within walking distance, but getting there took some extra time because I went ahead and made sure I didn't turn the same direction twice in a row. Better safe than sorry, right? When I got there, I got my coffee-flavored sugar milk and sat down to do some Googling. I wanted to see if there was anything strange in the history of my apartment complex. There wasn't. Next, I wanted to check and see if there was any information about the rules, which wasn't on Reddit. There wasn't. So, I finished my drink, packed up my stuff, and headed out to the library. This trip was a little easier since the way there was a straight shot, and I made sure to cross the street right in front of the library, so I only made one right turn. I knocked discreetly when I walked through the door and turned to go to the desk. Within seconds of my turn, I heard horns blaring, tires screeching, and someone yelling. I froze. I spun around and ran back to the door, making sure to knock as I ducked through it. 2 cars had collided, and it was my fault. It looked like no one was hurt, though both parties were going to need a lot of body work on their cars, which was good, but I had to be more careful from now on. Navigating through the library was stressful because I had to keep careful track of the turns I took as I looked through the supernatural and occult section. while watching the clock to make sure I didn't miss holding my breath. I was using my days out of the office to get into the habit of following the rules there as well. I pulled a few books, but there was nothing helpful in them. I went to the psychological section and pulled out the DSM and a few other books in which I thought I'd find information about OCD. None of them said anything about real consequences of breaking the compulsions, only that people imagine things going wrong as a result. So I realized that it really was happening. I didn't repeat my mistake on my way home, paying very close attention to my turns. It was a stroke of luck though, because I found myself distracted by cars passing with loud music or drivers with food in their hands. I couldn't help but wonder if bad things were going to happen to them, or if they were safe because they didn't know the rules. Maybe ignorance really was bliss. As I walked home, I found myself counting each turn. This way, I knew that if I was on an even number, I had to turn left, and an odd number meant a right turn. Happy to have solved at least one problem, I knocked on the door of my complex and headed into my apartment to wait for my landlord. I had planned to be sneaky about it and ask him if he could find a stud so I could hang a picture in the spot where the rules were hanging. But I decided to just ask outright since I knew it wasn't all in my head. I had just finished spinning when I heard 2 knocks on the door. I caught my breath and went to greet my landlord, who walked in with a smile. When he asked me if everything was okay, I asked him if anyone else had broken the rules. He tilted his head to the side and asked me what I was talking about. "You know, the rules of the house," I remember saying. "Has anyone ever broken them? And if so, what happened?" "Oh," he exclaimed, "I get it. If someone breaks the lease agreement, I give them a warning and then evict them if they continue to do the wrong thing. It's happened a time or two." "No, not the lease. The rules." I was a little annoyed. "You know, don't look at the watcher and set a plate out every meal." I pointed to the framed list that held up the index cards. "Those rules." I must have been more agitated than I thought, because he took a step back and then held up his hands. "Listen, I don't care what kind of rules you go by while you're living here, as long as your TV is turned down during quiet hours, and I don't have any property damage. Now, if you'll excuse me." With that, he ducked through my door and into the hallway, where he tripped and fell down the short set of stairs. I was stunned. He didn't know what I was talking about. He also fell after not knocking. I was completely convinced that it was real now, and that ignorance of the rules didn't excuse people from their consequences. I grabbed a pen and wrote, "Turn down the TV during quiet hours," and "no property damage" on the index card, just to be safe. Then I started thinking about the future. That night was a rough night for me. It felt like the rules were testing me after 2 failures during the day. The bell tolled, and while I was spinning, I felt myself being watched, so I had to close my eyes so I didn't look in the wrong place. It wasn't until I heard a loud boom of the TV exploding that I realized that the bell tolled for so long that it was past 9 by the time I finished spinning. I hadn't turned it down in time. Later, almost as soon as I got into bed, I heard breathing in the corner and had to cover my head for the whole night, which was the worst. I took a slow, deep breath and peeked out from under the corner of my blanket and immediately wished I hadn't. When I lifted the blanket, there was a grotesque face an inch from my eye. I barely had time to register its sunken eyes and pockmarked face before I pulled the blanket back down and scooted my body back against the wall to escape the tongue, which flicked out against the blanket. The next morning, I knew that I had to do something. All of the people in the world were breaking these rules and risking terrible things, and they didn't even know it. It was terrifying and tragic all at once. So I made copies of the rules. I typed them up and printed them out on clean white paper. There was no place to buy parchment anywhere near my place. I folded them up and put them in envelopes, which I slipped under the door at each apartment in my complex. As I walked out to spread the word and keep people safe, I also added a rule: learn to love the rules. Thank you for listening to I Used to Love the Rules by Chaos. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like. And if you enjoy hearing stories from me, please subscribe and become a resident of Hill Street. And let me know how I'm doing in the comments. And I hope all of you have a fantastic night.